c5.
Oh.
And, oh wow, okay, meanwhile, a game has started, the Armageddon between Magnus Carlsen and Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. Mamedyarov with the white pieces. And a quick start to this one. It's the English opening. A couple of pieces off the board already at this early stage.
Yes, and I'm just going to briefly mention that you guys wanted a Hikaru confessional, and we have a Hikaru confessional, and we'll play that during the break. And there we see Shak stepping up with his queenside pawns.
Yeah. A4 on the board from Shak, stepping forward with the queenside pawns, and okay, Magnus just basically playing a Sicilian but with reverse colours. Looks healthy to me. Black setup here, Judith. Who do you kind of hold as the favourite at this early stage?
Well, I like Black's position as it is pretty healthy. I'm not sure this A4 it's there, but of course in this position, white bishop from C1, it has a challenging task that where is it going to go, or it will stay there forever. Interesting A5 move, which was done by Mamedyarov, pushing the pawn. If Black is not going to be stopping A6, then I believe Mamedyarov is planning to push all the way. And also probably Queen A4 is something that he might be continuing, or Queen B3. But I'm kind of surprised to have this pawn push on the A5.
Especially so early in the game, you know, you're kind of taught that you have to develop your pieces. And Shak is saying, you know what, I'm just going to attack on the queen side and just, whoa, I was not expecting that. Shak is determined that Magnus's king lives on the king side.
The Shak attack is real, but he's forgetting to develop his pieces. White's pieces do not look ready for this opening of the position, Judith.
Well, 9 years ago when I stopped competitive chess, this was not the way it was considered the way to success.
That is true.
But to push all your pawns and without developing, you have one developed piece on G2. It's just very strange.
Yeah.
But now he's going for your plan at least, Judith. Putting some pressure on this black knight.
But the problem is, I mean, yes, there's pressure on the black knight, but take a look at white's knight on G1. How on earth is that getting out?
Probably the next move to play knight F3.
Yeah.
But then bishop H3 is also something to think of. I can also imagine that in the next move, let's say black plays D5 or F5, making it a more active play with black.
Yeah, I understand what Shak is trying to do. He's trying to open the position because he has bishops, but he's just not ready to do that. And actually, it's the side who's facing the bishop pair who should be trying to speed up the play here. So, yeah, Magnus, it looks like he's got all of his pieces in the game. Nice centralization, everything holding together. Time advantage is disappearing now. It's less than a minute and a half difference between the two. I think in terms of start to this game, not super promising for Mamedyarov. Magnus, could he go 7 out of 7 in the Armageddons? I spoke to him on the rest day and I can reveal he said he was shocked that he's holding his nerve in the Armageddon. He says he doesn't know how it's happening. Of course, he said he'd give everything for one classical win, but the Armageddon is where he's doing the business. And, okay, pawn takes pawn. And, okay, question here. Take that pawn with the knight or simply recapture with the pawn on E5?
The pawn.
That pawn on A6, we laughed at it a little bit, but it's a great endgame pawn. So definitely. Oh, I spoke too soon. It is endgame as the queens leave the board.
Yeah, if it was anyone else in the world, I think Magnus would have taken with the pawn, but against Mamedyarov, getting the queens off tends to be good wisdom there. So queens have left. White's pawn structure, not necessarily the worst.
Well, black probably wants to go bishop c6 to eliminate the white square bishop, and a6 pawn can be a weakness also in a later stage.
Yep, your prediction came true, and those bishops will be leaving the board.
Yeah, the problem is black lacks pawn breaks now, or lacks effective pawn breaks, so it feels like white has at least got some level of stability, and those bishops traded as predicted.
But is white's a6 pawn enough to give Shak serious winning chances? Because remember, Shak playing with the white pieces is in a must-win situation.
Yeah, this white a6 pawn could be backed up nicely by white's knight. If you could imagine a teleportation device, this white knight on h3 somehow landing on b5, attacking these pawns. But right now, it doesn't really kind of make a great impression.
I was just thinking about that too, that on b5, but how do I get there? Right? Knight g1, then I have to do what? Knight e2 somehow, but then the e3 pawn is hanging.
You need Nakamura's knight to dance around. You need a similar journey.
Could you put it on a3? But then it gets stopped by a pawn on c6 anyhow.
But to put it to a3, it's also
It's
e4
ridiculous
should
as well.
be, but you just don't reach that spot.
Well, Magnus breaking out in the center. And in terms of the clock situation, remember Magnus did start with a 3-minute deficit over Shakhriyar. Magnus has just got 4.5 minutes, whereas Shak has 6.5 minutes.
And Magnus with draw odds will want to play solidly. I think that influenced his queen trade decision. And now this last pawn push, I said he didn't have any pawn breaks. I just assumed he wouldn't want to undouble white's pawns. White's c pawns here. Here, kind of traditionally not favouring white, but Magnus is happy to trade off just to get his knights active. And there we see both the black knights now in the middle of the board.
Beautiful settings for black. Look at 2 rooks on the open file, 2 knights in the center, just idly placed.
Yeah, just beautiful centralization, but he has to move one of them. The knight on d5 was attacked, hits the white rook now.
But that knight on b4 is going to get anchored there with the c7 pawn. And wow, white's position is beginning to look like it's not good. And there you go, c5. I mean, there's no coordination whatsoever with white's pieces.
Well, finally there is a little idea that if white plays, let's say, bishop d2, and somehow when the knight moves away from b4, knight f4 to d5 can jump in.
Yeah, he starts with the other move order. Same idea, Judith. First some pressure, though, especially the white e2 pawn, the base of this chain. It's a bit vulnerable. You have to overprotect this pawn somehow before the white knight gets kicked away from its protection. You need to keep this chain intact, otherwise your whole position falls apart. Mamedyarov.
h4?
h4 looks good, just to prevent pawn to g5. And okay, he chooses instead to use his king to defend the e2 pawn, and a question mark, making white's position worse.
g5, knight d4.
Ooh.
Or immediately.
Jumping in first, big threat on the board. Black wants to play that move you mentioned, Jude, at g5, hitting, kicking away the white knight. Then the e2 pawn will fall. So how to deal with that? I think he has to push the pawn, the h pawn, to cover that threat. What else? You don't want to touch anything around your king. You don't want to touch your pawns. You'll only weaken them. Instead, he brings his bishop out to block the black rook on the e-file. It feels shaky.
Well,
it's holding together for now for white.
Well, knight bc2 would be provoking, and white would have to take on d4 for sure. But now maybe just knight moves away to f5, for example. Though after that already bishop goes back to d2.
If the black knight from the center ever moves, then white will step back and try to eliminate this piece.
Is it too rough if black goes rook e3 and g5?
Wow. Sacrificing here, Judith. No fear at all. Rook takes bishop.
On the board.
Wow. That would not have even been on my radar, sacrificing in an endgame, but the whole idea is tactical. He's going to break apart white's pawn chain once he's kicked the knight away. And Magnus looks up at the screen. The evaluation bar doesn't react, meaning this sacrifice is well justified. And Magnus looking pretty happy there on the camera, you've got to say, looking away as if he's just kind of proud of his move, proud of his idea. Looks nice, gotta admit.
Yes, it certainly looks nice. And bearing in mind that Shak is in a must-win situation and his white rooks are just not coordinating well. Knight has to move, the e2 pawn will drop, and then Shak just has to get on with the job of relocating the rook on a4, which is doing nothing.
Yeah, where to put that knight? That's the first question. Does he centralize it, potentially at the cost of a pawn?
I think knight d5 is the only move for white.
Ooh, he hesitated there, Mamedyarov. That knight, is it going to get ignored? Is it going to get captured? Magnus gives a check. The white king, where to go now?
He has to go back, I think, all the way to g1.
Oof. Running away, it has to, as you say, flee back to the corner.
But now can't Magnus just simply trade knights and step back and grab those pawns?
Yeah, we're expecting Magnus to trade off White's knight. That's the best piece right now. As you say, Jovanka, take this one and then somehow maybe go back for this pawn. That's your idea.
Yeah, it's also tempting to actually grab the pawn on d3 immediately with a knight.
Exactly, knight d3 and then knight d5 and g4 with the stabilizing the knight to f3.
If you can come to f3 with any of the knights, this black king is simply, the white king, sorry, is going to be caught in a box and mated.
But of course, there are several ideas. It's only that for black it's tricky what to choose out of the several options.
What would you choose, Judith, here? Magnus only needs a draw. He can choose the safer option if he needs. Which one's more simple?
I'm very much tempted to go knight d3. I'm not sure that's the best, but I somehow would go knight d3 and knight e5 or knight e1 at some point and g4.
You love that knight e1 move. It keeps happening this tournament. Full board vision there. Knight e1 coming in. Watch out for that to happen. Judith's predicted it correctly every time, I think. Knight takes d3 on the board. Magnus makes a bit of a face. He knew that was a difficult decision, and he's under 2 minutes. So he needs to speed up. What's Mamedyarov going to do to complicate the issue? This white rook on a4, as you said, Jovanka, just worst placed piece on the board. Where to go? What to do? Not easy.
It's certainly not easy, and also you have to bear in mind that black has ideas of anchoring a knight on f3, and that would be curtains for the white king. I was looking at moves like knight e5, trying to get the knight immediately in with check.
Yeah, looks very powerful as well.
Yeah, and I mean, white's only move is actually to try and trade off rooks, and that's going to be a very difficult job as well.
Well, now white's only plan can be that after knight e5 he goes rook f2.
Black's knights are so beautiful right now. Magnus will be reluctant to move them, but he really has to speed up. He's got about 1 minute 10 seconds now, and it's still 12, 13 moves before he gets any increment at all. So he has to make minimum 12 or 13 moves in 1 minute, and he's looking away from the board. What is this?
He needs to hurry up.
It's going to be
What's
physically difficult.
He's playing g4 immediately. Well, this allows knight f6 check, grabbing a pawn.
Yeah, the knight can check and take this pawn next move.
But this would lead maybe to a draw, because after check, king goes out, knight to g4. I think black goes h5.
Yeah, white's knight is kicked all the way back.
And if knight f2, then knight f3 and knight e1, some kind of perpetuate check.
But the problem is knight f3 is such a serious threat. If the black knight arrives there, then you have checkmating ideas with the rook taking h2.
Massive threat on the board. Mamedyarov, under 3 minutes now, has to deal with this one. I think I would just give this check now and just hope to survive. If you don't have any options as Mamedyarov, you should just try and play quickly, not give Magnus time to think. Calculation needs to be done, of course.
But he has plenty of times for the moment, 2.5 minutes. And if he calculates ahead, then he can play his moves. Not only one, but several moves quickly.
Yeah, but Magnus will do the same. To pause now or to pause later, that's the question. I agree with the featured chat, just flag him, just move. Not too many options here for Mamedyarov. I'm looking for others. Maybe he can hit the
There is a move rook d1.
Yeah, hit one of the black knights with his rook. That must be the only real alternative. Maybe you can... Yeah, it's just so difficult. He just needs to decide. As the featured chat says, white has definitely got ideas of sacrificing on the b6 square later for white's a pawn to run through, but first you have to deal with your king. So he actually steps back with his knight, trying to trade off. Makes a lot of sense as well.
But right now, maybe knight f3 is also possible. I know, because takes and knight d3.
And there we see a trade of knights. And again, Magnus now has to play very quickly, advances his f-pawn. And Magnus has a dream position. All his pieces are well placed, and white's rooks are just not coordinated.
Yeah, rooks thrive on open files, and if you notice, Magnus has blocked every single open file. But look at this, a sacrifice in the air. Watch out for rook takes pawn, followed by the white pawn promoting. We mentioned something similar earlier. This white a pawn is white's only hope.
Oh.
And Okay, is it on the cards now? That's the question. Rook takes pawn. Magnus, he's allowed it to happen. If rook takes pawn, maybe, is he going to ignore that? There's some counterattacks against the white king. And okay, now the black knight has stepped back. He defends everything. No sacrifices available. And white's rook's looking for those open files. Can he plug that open file with his knight? With the black knight?
He's going to have to. And Magnus now under 20 seconds.
Ooh, and we see a cross next to Magnus's move. That means a missed opportunity. Maybe there was something stronger.
Well, maybe now rook e2 can be unpleasant, or at least fighting for something from white's point of view.
Rook e2 on the board. We're going to see the rooks leave the board. Knight comes in.
Yeah, and black's knight has lost a lot of power with that trade of rooks. Now it's going to be incredibly tough to stop white's rook from infiltrating later, but he's using his king, Magnus, aggressively. It's going to be a race, simply. And who's ahead here? Black's pawn's running.
Black's pawn is really running.
But the A pawn is so close.
Well,
White's rook has to get greedy here, simply has to capture the pawn and hope for the best. Shak's being accurate so far, as mentioned there in the featured chat, but is it enough to win? Black's pawns are so fast.
Yeah, but after c2, yeah, this was a smart move, I believe. Very smart.
Covering the promotion square, so now black will simply threaten to push his pawn. It might cost white his rook, unless now he abandons the defense of his A pawn.
7 seconds for black.
yeah.
Magnus, he's got a 1 second increment now, but that's no luxury. It's not enough 1 second over the board.
Okay.
White's going to move his rook.
Very tricky position. What's he played? Rook c2, but that gives up the a6 pawn.
Gives up the a6 pawn, and look, his pawns are running now. Shak looks away, even at the cost of the black knight. Magnus is going to win the game. The pawn's too strong.